was even warned and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Keep the jokes clean.
Have we reached a critical mass?
I think we have, Jason. I think we're ready whenever you are.
Yeah, I think I see everyone.
Only person I think I don't see from the list would be Jack, maybe.
I talked to him earlier today and he said he was going to be on the call. So
Okay.
Okay.
I'm sure he's just running a little bit late.
I'll give it one more minute.
Do that.
I wonder if I have his cell number.
The only person I was aware of that couldn't make it, and Diane, feel free to chime in, was Chris Damiani from GMT.
Yeah, it looks like everybody's here except for Jack and Chris.
Yeah, I'm trying to ping Jack as well. I'll see if I get a hold of him.
Can you? I don't have his cell phone. I have his Gmail, but if he's like me, I'm not always looking at my email.
That's a good
After
thing.
hours. After hours, I should say.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, since we're being recorded, and Lonnie might tell my boss. Oh.
Even during work hours, sometimes you got to focus.
Yes. Yes, I'd like to think I can multitask, but it means different things to different people, I think.
Jim, your secret is safe with me.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll pay you off later. Oh.
All right, let's get this going, and hopefully you can join us at some point soon. So welcome everybody. This is the Colchester Avenue Advisory Committee. It's our third meeting. I don't think we've had this group together for quite some time. It's been almost a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, March, I think was the last time we got together. But we have had a recent public meeting, which I think a fair amount of you were in attendance for. And so wanted to get the band back together, if you will. And hopefully tonight we can come to some recommendations on some preferred alternatives to move forward up the ladder to the DPW Commission, the TUC, and eventually the City Council. In an effort to try to keep things in order tonight, if you wouldn't mind, during the presentation, I think that Drew and Karen will largely be running. If you wouldn't mind raising your hands so we don't talk over each other, that would be appreciated. And the other thing, before we get into things, public comment period. Is there anybody from the public who would like to speak before we get the advisory committee's meeting underway? If you'd like to do so, now is your time.
Do I just speak? Or...
Please, welcome.
Hi, my name's Zoe. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an intern with Sustainable Transportation Vermont. I just wanted to quickly express my support for Concept 2 East, Concept 2 West, and Alternative 2 for the Colchester Ave project. I think we have a really unique opportunity to make Colchester Avenue into a model corridor for the region, and I believe that all of these options are the safest, most efficient options for Burlington bikers, pedestrians, and motorists alike. And I know that I've spoken to some other members of the public, and there's like a little bit of concern over Alternative 2 compared to Alternative 4 and which one is the best option. And as someone who has lived on Colchester Avenue, I would feel significantly safer in intersection that's focused around cyclists and pedestrians rather than a roundabout that's more focused on motorists. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Zoe. Is there anybody else who would like to chime in? I know I've heard from several, I hate to assume, but I would imagine also interning with sustainable transportation or people you've spoken to. I've received a few emails, so I appreciate that feedback, from them weighing in.
I do have a question. You talked about, you referred to other emails from the public?
Mhm.
Are these things that we can see?
We'll go over the high points coming up in the presentation. I
Thank
have
you.
forward you the individual emails. It's very similar to what Zoe said. Just recommendations or preference for concept 2 across the board, and I think most had not weighed in on the intersection itself. I prompted a few if they'd like to do so, but I did not hear back from them. I heard back from one. Zoe, I can't recall if it was you or not.
I don't believe it was me. I didn't send
Okay.
any emails, but definitely someone that I've spoken to.
Okay, then that makes 2 for alternative 2 at the intersection. And the rest, I think it was probably on order of 4 or 5 emails in support of concept 2, both on the east and west side.
All right. Shall we get underway?
I think so.
Sounds good. All right. So yeah, just to echo Jason's words, I think this isn't necessarily, we want this to look and feel like a committee meeting. The whole raised hand feature is, just so we're not speaking over each other. So in addition to that, if anybody, as you're not speaking, please just be muted just to avoid any sort of distractions or background sound for the rest of the group. Always appreciated. But yeah, without further ado, thanks for joining us at our 3rd advisory committee meeting. Just to go over briefly what we'll do tonight, just to make sure we all remember each other's names and where we're from, we'll do a brief reintroduction on the next slide. We'll then review our takeaways from the public meeting from a few weeks ago of the alternatives and what we heard from folks there. We'll then review and discuss the remaining alternatives, what we kept and what we thought could be done away with at this point in our scoping study process. We'll then seek to refine and select a preferred alternative and review the next steps before we depart. So just a quick reintroduction here. I think we'll go around the room in quotes here and have each team member come off mute, reintroduce yourselves and your affiliation, and then just to avoid any confusion, please pass the baton, if you will, to another one of the individuals here for them to introduce themselves. So I will start. My name is Drew Gingras. I'm with VHB, the consulting firm representing the RPC in the city of Burlington on this study. I'm the project engineer, and I will pass it along to Jen.
And I am Jen Conley, and also working with Drew and Karen on this project. I am the moderator this evening, and because we're in a meeting format, I've just been alerted to the fact we don't have a raised hand feature. So what I would love, if you don't mind, if you could just, say in the chat question or a comment or something. I can either read it aloud if you want to type it out, or if you just want to speak, just throw your name in there and we'll call on you to speak. I apologize for that. It's nice we're able to have this in more of a meeting format and not, webinar where, we can all participate together, but I guess we lost some of those features as a result. And I'll pass it on to Karen. I apologize.
Karen Sentoff. I'm also part of the consultant team on this effort, more on the planning side of things. And I will pass it along to Jason, even though he already introduced himself briefly.
I may not have done the full thing, but Jason Shrest with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, the project manager on behalf of the CCRPC for this project. And I will pass it over to Marshall Distel.
Hi everyone, Marshall Distel. I'm also a transportation planner with the CCRPC. And I will pass it to Nicole.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicole Loesch with the City of Burlington. I'm in the Department of Public Works. And I'll just run down the list and pass this to Will.
Hey everyone, I'm Will Clavel. I work for Burlington's Community and Economic Development Office, supporting businesses, and I will pass it off to Ashley.
Hi, I'm Ashley Bond. I'm with UVM Medical Center, and I'll pass it off to Jim.
I am Jim Barr. I'm with UVM. I'm also with the Old East End. I live along this corridor, and I'm a DPW commissioner. So I'd like to say I'm trying to approach this 3 different ways. And I'll pass it to Dave Colley.
Thanks, Jim. Dave Cawley. I live on Nash Place, right off of Colchester, and I also represent the NPA for Ward 1 on this committee. And I'll pass it on to Jason Stuffle.
I am Jason Stuffle, and I'm with the excuse me, Burlington Walk Bike Council. I'm the Ward 1 liaison for that and a committee member on it. And then I'm also a 15-year resident of Colchester Ave. And I'll pass it along to Jack Hansen.
Hey, everybody. Sorry, I was a minute late. I was jumping off a forum. My name is Jack Hansen. I'm the East District City Councilor, which is Wards 1 and 8, which includes obviously Colchester Avenue in Ward 1. And I will pass it to Chris Damiani.
Chris is here. So I'm going to pass it.
I can't see who else here. I'm just looking at the list of the committee. So is Mario Dupigny-Guiraud from VTrans here, or I can't see?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay. I guess I'll pass it over to you then.
So I'm Mario Dupigny-Guiraud with VTrans, and so I'm not sure if there's anybody else on the list after that.
Diane?
You guys heard me, or?
Yeah, there's Nathan and there's Diane. Yeah.
Hi, Diane Meyerhoff. I'm the outreach person for the consultant team. And who's left?
I see somebody named Nathan Greenstein.
Nathan?
Is that somebody? That might be from the public.
From the
Would you
public,
like to
I believe.
introduce yourself?
Nathan, you're welcome to introduce yourself if you'd like, but don't feel like you have to.
Yeah, sure. I'm Nathan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a junior at UVM and interning with Sustainable Transportation Vermont as well.
Well, thanks all, and thanks Nathan for attending as well. Moving along here, just a quick recap of our project scope and schedule as we've kind of discussed so far. This is our first meeting since March of 2020, and lo and behold, it's nearly March again, which I'm not sure if that's as wild for everyone else as it is for me, but here we find ourselves in late February and at our 3rd committee meeting. So after this, you know, we only have a couple steps left. We will seek to finalize our preferred alternative, and then we'll get into the draft scoping report itself, with presentations coming for the DPW, the TUC, and City Council as well, likely happening over the next few months. And then last with the final scoping report to be completed in May. So just a quick recap of the alternatives that we evaluated to date and that were the mainstay of our alternatives presentation, the public meeting held a few weeks back. You know, we looked at the Colchester Avenue corridor split into basically 3 different segments: the west end, the east end, and then of course the intersection between Colchester Avenue and East Avenue. We evaluated 2 concepts in the west end. We evaluated really 3 concepts with kind of 2 iterations of the same concept in the east end, and then 4 separate alternatives at the intersection with the East Avenue. And a quick recap of what we learned. There was, as Jason has already expressed, an outpouring of support for concept 2, the raised bike lanes in the west end, and with the additional feedback that we've received to date, I think kind of it's not necessarily appropriate to say concept 2 in the east end, but the more over the concept of raised and separated bike lanes in the east end. And we'll get into kind of the nuance of concept 2, 3, and 3A, which we can see here in the polling results shown on the screen. Wasn't even split across the board. There was some expressed concern over what we presented for concept 3A, which we dubbed a mixing zone at the time. We'll get into a little bit more detail about the evaluation there. There was also some vocalized support and opposition to the roundabout alternative at the East Avenue intersection. And the final kind of thing of note was the expressed need to address bus transit considerations in the report and in our preferred alternative development and kind of analysis going forward. Chris, obviously unable to make it tonight, but provided us some comments that we can touch on. So from that poll that we received during the alternatives presentation, we basically chose to maintain and eliminate certain concepts and alternatives. And those corridor concepts we maintained were concept 2 in the west end, eliminating concept 1, and then we maintained concept 2, 3, and 3A in the east end, eliminating concept 4 and concept 1 there in the east end too. The intersection alternatives we maintained were alternative 2 and 4. Alternative 2, just for a refresher, represented the realignment and signal upgrades, as well as bicycle-specific signal upgrades at the intersection with East Avenue. And alternative 4 was, of course, the roundabout. And thus, we eliminated alternative 1, which was minimal striping upgrades, and alternative 3, which is the realignment and signal upgrades, keeping, for the most part, the bicycle infrastructure piece of the design and pedestrian infrastructure piece of the design the same as it currently is in the existing condition. So just a quick recap of the preferred alternatives that we are keeping. We're going to go through, I'll go through the corridor concepts. We'll go through the evaluation matrices for these, and then we'll have a formal time for discussion. But again, as anything comes up, please feel free to just come off mute and say, hey, Drew, real quick, and I'll be sure to pause and give somebody else the floor. So
Hey, Drew, real quick.
Yep. Thanks, Jason. Great rule follower.
You got it. If you could just back up one slide.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that committee members are okay with us striking these other alternatives. You know, we felt, given the feedback at the last public meeting, it was appropriate to do so and kind of narrow the focus of your decision making down on the ones that we've kept. Does anybody have any issues with that they'd like to make known for whatever reason? Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Drew.
Moving along, no problem. So looking at concept 2 in the west end of the corridor, just to refresh everybody's memories, this was the above and beyond the preferred alternative in this over the on-street but separated bike lanes. There was definitely a lot of support for what we're referring to as raised and separated bike lanes. And these are, as you can kind of see in the sample image in the top right corner, bike lanes that are raised from the roadway at a separate grade from both the roadway and the sidewalk, and separated from the roadway more than likely using a grass strip or a tree belt where possible. We can see in the, I should say, west end of the west end here, the cross section would be wide enough to incorporate a tree belt along this section of the corridor. As we do move to the east, that grass strip separator kind of narrows to a 4-foot width with some potential for the green belt to incorporate trees along the way here. One thing of note that came up during the public meeting was just the need to address transit. These concepts didn't explicitly do that, but it's always been in the back of our minds that as we progress these designs, we'll need to make sure we're incorporating, appropriate bus landings that are accessible for users of all abilities along the corridor at the existing bus stops. And another consideration that was raised during the public meeting was just how will these concepts address stormwater considerations, with concern over the bike lane becoming a space where that would just collect stormwater. And those were both things we said during the meeting would be more appropriately considered and addressed during the actual engineering design phase of if a preferred alternative is selected and pushed to that degree of design. But those will all be things taken into consideration. A couple of examples actually shown up on the previous slide. I'll click back one. You can see potentially, the tree boxes here, how they have chambers for stormwater mitigation, things like that, as well as potentially porous pavement. Those are all more kind of nuanced design details that'll come up in the engineering phase of the project, and those will be considered going forward. So moving into the east section, 3 alternatives were dubbed preferred alternatives as they were presented to the public. And important to note, as I click to the next slide here, that the east end, what we can refer to as around the curve and down the hill, is the same cross section for all three of these alternatives. So we'll just be considering kind of this, the western end of the east end here. And when we look at concept 2, concept 3, and concept 3A. So it's worth noting that while the cross section shown represents the majority of the corridor, it's not indicative of the entire length. We're really focused on how can we make this space work relative to what is adjacent to one section or another. So you'll see on this example that we have shown a 3-foot wide grass strip. However, when you get east of University Road, you can see that there is room to widen that grass strip in this concept 2 to incorporate something like a tree belt. The cross section would then narrow around the curve to accommodate some of the slope constraints adjacent to Greenmount Cemetery, and then the greenbelt would resume east of the cemetery and down the hill. So we would maintain that separation in the hill section of this alternative. Now, so concept 2 continues the preferred alternative from the west end and looks at raised and separated bike lanes through this section from East Avenue to Greenmount Cemetery. Just keeping a consistent cross section through here. Concept 3 and 3A are where we get into, pardon me, we are going to look down the hill first, just for everyone's knowledge. This is what concept 2 east, as well as concept 3 and concept 3A will look like east of Greenmount Cemetery, down the hill where we maintain the grass strip all the way to Barrett Street. So concept 3 represents concept 2, the raised and separated bike lanes idea, and incorporates enhancements to better address the purpose and the need of the project. So concept 3, the primary change between concept 2 and 3 is that concept 3 incorporates on-street parking, to address the needs of residents and local businesses alike. And I will include a note here that we were made aware today that Dave Colley and some other members of the advisory committee recently did some data collection in this area. And Dave, you and all, after I'm done reviewing this concept and the next one, I'll open the floor up to you. If you'd like to just share some of your findings, please feel free to come off mute and do that. We'd love to hear what you found relative to, I think, primarily Campus Kitchen and the other local businesses in this area. But first, I'll just review this, and then concept 3 real quick, concept 3A real quick, then we can hear from you guys. So concept 3, as we can see here, we build in on-street parking in deliberate locations to try and address the needs of the project while not negatively impacting the other kind of purpose and need of the project to improve safety for mobility users, bicyclists, and pedestrians in the area. So this looks at 3 sections that can possibly fit some on-street parking to address that need without encroaching on private driveways or negatively impacting the safety of those facilities for the more exposed users. Concept 3A took that same idea of incorporating on-street parking and added a need for high turnover on-street parking immediately in front of Campus Kitchen. And this concept was kind of the result of some direct outreach with Campus Kitchen that Jason pursued. They brought it to the RPC and our project team's attention that the bulk of their business occurs midday, and it involves primarily folks using private vehicles to drive up, park in front of Campus Kitchen or in the adjacent lot along University Road, access their business, get back in their car, and proceed onward. And so we developed a concept that had high turnover on street parking, and that's what you're seeing represented in the cross section here, with a 7-foot parking lane adjacent to 2 12-foot travel lanes, and then what we were calling a mixing zone. Now, since the alternatives presentation with the public, we as a project team met, and it was decided that if this concept 3A is chosen as the preferred alternative, it will be modified so what is currently shown as a mixing zone will actually match the cross section along the remainder of the corridor, basically noting that what is currently shown as an 8-foot shared section in front of Campus Kitchen would actually be the full width 5-foot sidewalk adjacent to a full width 5-foot bike lane, and that extra space to accommodate that full width relative, rather than the minimum of 8 feet for the mixing zone, would come more than likely from the grass strips and could incorporate a slight shift out of its current boundary shown. So a little bit more encroachment, all still taking place within the public right of way. But we wanted to note that, because it'll come up again when we assess the evaluation matrix, that where we discuss an adjustment to the safety evaluation of this concept, it will actually stay the same through here if concept 3A is considered the preferred alternative for this corridor. With that, Dave, did you want to share anything from your findings, and then we can get into the matrices?
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, it was interesting. We had a meeting, Jason Stuffle, Jack Hansen, Zoe, and myself met almost 2 weeks ago, and we started wondering about the car traffic and the pedestrian traffic at Campus Kitchen. And so we said, well, we've got a week and a half or so that we could collect some data. And we said, let's go do it. And so thanks to Zoe and to Nathan on the call, they were both out there as well as Jason. We spent a total of about 25 hours watching people come and go from Campus Kitchen. And we observed in 3 different time periods. We observed from 7:30 to 9 in the morning, 11 to 1 p.m. in the afternoon, and then again from 3:30 to 5 p.m. So we caught most of the major times of business going on there. And overall, we saw about 350 people, and it was all weekdays. We didn't do any observations on the weekend. And it's as the owners suggested, that this is really a peak lunch stop business. It's a quick in and quick out. 65% of their business came in that 11 to 1 p.m. Time period. So 65% of the average daily customers came in during that time period. And also 65% of the customers arrived by car. So what became clearly evident is that UVM parking lot is key to their business, because over 50% of the cars are using that lot right now as a place to park and go in there. The rest of them are parking either mostly in the 15-minute spaces right out in front. There was very little observations of cars parking on other parts of the street or on side streets. Everybody was either parking right out in front or into that parking lot. And then about 35% of their customers were pedestrians coming in during that time period. So it's, as the business operates right now, this lunch period is a key component. And I talked to the owner, I sent them the results from the research and talked to them. And they confirm that this is the pattern that they're very familiar with. In fact, what they're saying is the volume that we observed was lower than it normally would be because of the pandemic. And it's also lower because if we were observing in, let's say, April or May, there would be a much higher volume of customers as well. So those were a couple of caveats regarding the observations that we saw there. But by and large, he said this really typifies our business, and that the parking spaces really are kind of vital to their operations.
All right, thanks, Dave. Anybody have any more on that?
Drew, we have a few actual questions in the chat before we move along. I mean, if anyone wants to ask Dave a question, I don't want to interrupt if anyone has a specific question for him, because these are on different topics. Oh, Jack?
Yeah, thanks. Dave, when you said 65% of the business was during that rush period, but you just meant of your data set, right? Which wasn't the full business day. It was just certain time periods, right?
Well, we covered, we covered covered 5 hours. Campus Kitchen is currently open from 7:30 in the morning to 5 p.m. So that's, roughly about 9 hours. So we got most of the day. And I can tell you those other time periods of the day are very slow. In fact, the distinction between even 3 to 5 p.m. or 7:30 to 9 p.m. was dramatic in terms of how much business is going on there. I mean, essentially, it's the lunch deli business. That drives the whole operation there. The fact that they're in business to provide services to our neighborhood, like going in and buying milk or getting a dozen eggs, that's gravy. The real business is that lunch core business that they do. That's where they make their money.
Got it. But the 65% was just of your data, right? Not of like an entire set.
It was of those 3 time periods that we observed, 65% of the people that we saw came in that time, in that lunch period. Yeah.
Okay.
Looks like Jason would like to respond as well.
Can I
Yeah,
just add
sure.
to that real quick, Jason?
Go ahead first, sure.
I just want to add that I was just looking back at my notes with when we met with Bill Mahoney at Campus Kitchen, and he was he told us at the time that between 10:30 and 2 p.m., 10:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. was 60% of their business. So food for thought. Sorry, Jason. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I've lived across the street from here for a long time, and I agree with the thing that it's very much a rush business at lunch that comes in there. I'd like to eliminate the on-street parking if it causes the mixing zone, but if we can have full dedicated sidewalks and bike lanes through there and fit ability to people park in front there, I'm not completely opposed to that, but I would say behavior change is a good thing. When the 2 spots directly in front of the place were full, when I sat there for multiple hours, people simply pulled into the parking lot on the side and walked over. People didn't drive past. I mean, maybe I can't tell that, but I saw that. But also there's 2 additional on-street 15-minute spots past the UVM lot that were empty. As far as I could tell, 99% of the time we saw like 5 cars use it in 25 hours because it's a further distance to walk. And so I think, if it all comes down to it, I think people will walk 75 feet, which I measured from the parking lot to the business. And Jim Barr has discussed this with me, but there's potentials to make that parking lot bigger. I know UVM doesn't have funds, but if you kind of reconfigure it, you can make more spots in there, just so it's not so unpredictable for people coming down the road, people pulling in and out and other things like that. But from my observations, I think there is a real ability to put the parking into the UVM lot and not need additional stuff if that's a possibility.
I'd like to add too that we also observed delivery trucks, not many on the days that we saw, but delivery trucks use both the 15-minute parking spaces as well as the UVM lot. Some of those trucks are pretty big. We saw like a Heineken truck that's a 40-foot truck that needs some pretty big turnaround room to be able to maneuver in that parking lot. The other thing we noticed was that very few non-Campus Kitchen customers in the lot. So that lot, on the days that we observed, the time periods we served, it was primarily Campus Kitchen customers.
So a couple of the other things that came up as a part of this discussion was Ashley asked about hearing how vehicles will be able to yield to emergency vehicles in scenarios where there isn't a center turn lane. So in the section that's say on your screen right now, Drew, is there enough room for vehicles to yield to let an emergency vehicle, an ambulance get through to get to the hospital?
Yep, these lanes are designed at 12, or at least laid out at 12 feet, which I believe is the minimum required along an emergency route that would allow space for cars to pull over and still have enough clear space down the center line to allow emergency vehicles through.
And Jason Stuffel asked a question about connecting to the Riverside Ave path to the bike lane and Concept 2 East. It didn't look like there was a bike lane in the short jug handle area I'm going to guess that that's something that obviously would be a goal of the design, but that hasn't, the details on that haven't been hashed out. But Drew, please feel free to add if you.
Yeah, I think that's purely a project limits thing. We went to Barrett Street. That would be, though, I'm sure considered if the project were to progress to engineering design.
There is a preferred alternative for that intersection as well. Is that
right,
correct,
okay.
Jason?
Correct.
So I think we defer to the preferred alternative, but try to make the connections appropriately to the preferred alternatives that would be carried forward from this effort.
Yeah, I think depending on which moves first, we try to set the other one up for success, unless they moved forward at the same time.
Okay, I want to make sure that didn't get overlooked, that you had to like ride on the sidewalk for 10 feet between the two and then connect up. Thank you.
Yeah. Fair.
And otherwise, I also posted in the chat, Jason had shared the presentation PDF if you want to open it and look along.
Thanks, Jen. I forgot to make mention of that at the start.
Go ahead, Drew. That was it for now.
All right. Thank you. Thanks all. And thanks, Dave and Jason, for talking us through your findings. So now real quick, we're just going to step through the evaluation matrices for kind of the 3 remaining corridor concepts in the east end here. This is more for the public meeting, but just as a refresher, each of these items are kind of how we evaluate these alternatives at the start when we have a big pool of them, how we narrow them down to the 3 that then get pushed forward through this analysis, and then obviously which one ends up being the preferred alternative. So the costs here are presented on a relative scale. As we kind of just reviewed, concepts 2, 3, and 3A are all relatively similar in the cost department because they all represent nearly the same improvements with some slight nuanced adjustments that wouldn't really impact the cost of either of these 3 alternatives. The safety of the corridor, just worth noting, as the red box here likely stands out above the other ones. As we touched on, the mixing zone will likely be removed from concept 3A if that is the preferred alternative going forward. So it's worth noting that the safety evaluation for that concept will match the others to be no change or slightly improved, given that there will now be fewer cyclists using the sidewalk through this section because they'll have their own dedicated space. For pedestrians, whereas they will absolutely be improved for bicyclists because they'll be in a separated facility along the corridor. Looking at vehicle safety, we also see a slight improvement across the board because of the reduction in conflicts by separating the bikes from the shared space in the road and giving them their own space for travel. Looking through the impacts, we tend to evaluate these kind of selected items: utilities, right-of-way, constructability, parking, trees, and then historical or archaeological impacts that from each alternative. Here, we are looking at what would be considered a streetscape or roadway reconstruction. Therefore, there would be major impacts that we would consider to the utilities, as all of those would need to be, the majority of them would need to be modified in a reconstruction project. Right-of-way impacts, it's important to note here, while we say no impacts for concept 2 east, but minor impacts for concept 3 and 3A, these are not actual, we do not anticipate actual impacts to private property, but more assessing these against the kind of space that is utilized regularly by residents and just the general public along the corridor would have an impact there. I just saw a big hand go up. Looks like Jason.
Yeah, I was just curious, in what spot is the right-of-way impact? Because pretty much the difference between all of them is in front of Campus Kitchen, it seems like, or the adjacent properties. Is that where there would be an impact? I'm not quite, from all the concepts, I don't quite see where the shift is, maybe.
Yeah, so if you look at this concept 3 here, you see where we're creating space for the parking bays. Again, it's not an anticipated actual impact to private right-of-way. All of the concepts are designed to fit within the public right-of-way. This is more of a greater impact to the recreational space or resident utilized space along the corridor. So where we are proposing these bump outs to install/maintain on-street parking, you can see the cross section is naturally going to shift outside the boundaries of concept 2 seen here, which is more holding this back of sidewalk line. Now, if you pictured where we were drafting the on-street parking in this location, and then on both sides of this driveway, there's a greater shift at the back of the sidewalk naturally because we're creating more space for that on-street parking.
Okay, yeah, my house is right across from there, so I know the two properties there that you're talking about, and I don't think that would really impact them very much. So that's good to know. It's just a big, huge front green yard, not other uses there. So that makes me feel better from a neighborhood representative and what my neighbors might feel.
Sure thing. Constructability. Any other questions? I guess while we're here. Otherwise, I'll keep along. All right. Constructability, again, similar to the utility impacts. We did anticipate major impacts given that these concepts, as we know, represent reconstruction streetscape efforts. Parking, we've probably already discussed those in full. So in the interest of saving more time for discussion, I'll pass over the parking as those have been addressed in the review of the concepts. Trees, we see moderate impacts to some of the trees in the existing tree belt, and there is some tree belt opportunity in each of these. And we see major impacts, again, kind of pertaining to the right-of-way discussion that Jason just brought up, purely because there is more of an impact with the concepts that introduce on-street parking, naturally because there's a wider impact to the land at hand. And then there are, fortunately, no historic or archaeological impacts based for either any of these alternatives. Jason?
May I ask, is there an alternative where we just have the cut-in in front of Campus Kitchen and those additional spots further down? I'm not sure what they're used for. Are they residential, or, maybe you could just have it at Campus Kitchen where they need it and not the 2 additional cut-ins as well, maybe as an alternative. I don't know, but I'm wondering what those spots are meant for.
I believe they were primarily to address the residential need for parking as well as additional business parking. I think we're past the point of additional alternatives or considering other alternatives. I think the real goal of this meeting is to arrive, at the end of the tunnel here with one preferred alternative.
Yep. Yeah. No. I'm just thinking long term for my neighbors when I talk to them about the impacts to their property, if that's really necessary or not. We're addressing Campus Kitchen, but that's the residential parking, which could possibly be solved by parking on side streets. So that's my neighborhood representative viewpoint.
Yep. Jim? I have a polite hand raising here.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
I couldn't find the hand raising feature in participants, probably because I'm on a Mac. I guess I would just remind, and many of you may not even already know this, but I know Nicole does, that it wasn't too long ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that we removed parking on the north side of Colchester Avenue. And that wasn't an easy sell, but there was ample parking on the south side. And being a DPW commissioner, I can tell you that will likely be one of the points of contention as we discuss it amongst the commission. I personally am thinking that there's plenty of driveway space in many of those apartment buildings there, and if they use TDM measures or transportation incentives for their tenants, they can get by, but most like to take the easy way and just rent a place and say, yeah, you got plenty of parking here. So I'm just saying that might be one of the challenges if we were to eliminate those spaces in 3A minus the mixing zone.
Thanks, Jim.
I'll also quickly add that, initially in this concept, we were thinking through to the opportunity to possibly have bus transit utilize some of that bump out space. So that is also an opportunity that we were thinking through, and sort of, exchanging those extra parking spaces for dedicated space for the bus to pull over and have a dedicated stop. So that is another opportunity that we maybe want to be thinking about in the back of our minds as we're thinking through the refinements of these to go forward.
Thank you, Karen, because that's one thing I had a concern with, is that is a bus stop across the street from my house where that cut-in is. And if people park there, they can't utilize the bus stop, which is also the current situation where the bus has to stop out in the road and people have to walk between parked cars and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Karen. So the last slide here in the evaluation matrix looks at kind of the community character and each concept's impact to that. Aesthetically across the board, we see this as each alternative or each concept as an improvement to the aesthetic with the addition of refined grass strips and potential tree belts in some places. And then the satisfying the project purpose and need, we say yes across the board with the asterisk of parking. Have we talked about parking yet? With the asterisk to address concept 2, given it does not really incorporate on-street parking, and that is obviously, as this committee and the public meeting saw, the public meeting showed us that there is definitely a need to address that. So we've incorporated these concepts 3 and 3A to identify that parking need, and just calling out concept 2, that while it does address the majority of the purpose and need statement for the project, it does not get into the parking need. All right, so now we kind of have a breakup slide here for just an open forum of discussion. I see Jim is going to lead us off, and if anybody has any comments on the corridor, please also step in. After this slide, Karen is going to get into the East Avenue intersection.
I'm sorry, I
Jim?
just had one more comment about the previous conversation. I want to make it clear that from my discussions with other partners and departments on UVM's campus about the use of that little lot at the entrance of Centennial Field, it is favorable in most people's conversations to have short-term parking. So if anybody thinks, oh well, if we eliminate all the residential parking down the street, they can just all park in that little parking lot there, just in front of there. That right now is not acceptable because of the potential uses for Centennial Field, for athletic events, for the need for fire trucks to get in and out. And so that's one of the challenges. So I just wanted to make that clear before we move forward, we definitely are very close to considering it. There already is short-term parking there, actually. If we could make it a little bigger and fit more cars, that would be great. But it can't be for residential overnight parking.
Okay.
Thanks.
There was also a comment raised in the chat from Zoe that she had put out a petition in support of concepts 2 East and West, as well as alternative 2. So just wanted that kind of introduced to the group, that she does have a petition.
All right.
Yes, I just wanted to add that the petition, which states that all the signers are in support of concept 2 West, East, and the alternative 2, has 121 signatures, so it's quite popular.
Is it possible, Zoe, just to share the, are those generally residents or students, or?
It's a mix of residents from Front Porch Forum areas around downtown and Colchester Avenue, as well as students, many of whom do live on Colchester Avenue, and that's one of the questions on the petition.
Thank you.
Zoe, can I ask a clarifying question? Because I think one of the things that we had seen in the public meeting was folks were supporting alternative 2 in some cases because they were not supporting the mixing zone that was a result of 3A. Do you think that's something that if folks knew that there was an alternative that's kind of a hybrid between the two, that there might have been more support for 3 or 3A?
There may be more support if they knew there was a hybrid option. I can't be sure. I do know that the concept 2 is intriguing because it puts cyclists first and makes it a very consistent route for cyclists, which is just safer overall.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Jack, I see a hand up.
I wanted to pivot back to way back at the beginning, just with the western part of the corridor. I just had a quick question that I wanted to clarify about that. Yeah, exactly. So the way that it's drawn, I was a little confused because it seems like there's little cutouts for driveways that are shown in sort of a black or a gray. But then they hit into a green space.
Just drafting. That's just a drafting error.
Oh,
So the
okay, but-
driveway would continue. Yeah.
Okay, so people are pulling across through the two green belt, or I guess it's not a green belt for those little cutouts. It's not a green belt.
It would be where there is not currently a driveway, correct?
Where there's not. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Yep. Dave?
Yeah, I just want to express my appreciation for the team and taking a look at the mixing zone issue. And, you know, I know it was supported at the public meeting by Locomotion. Jonathan Weber mentioned the idea of there could be space to have a dedicated bike lane, pedestrian area, and as well as parking, you know, in front of Campus Kitchen. So it seems like you're going to be able to get the same level of safety that we're trying to achieve on the corridor as a whole by using those dimensions for that area. So it seemed like it was a good alternative, and one that actually, you know, when I think about this project, it's a really big project. You take a look at the whole corridor, how many millions of dollars are going to have to go into this? We saw the you know, that the utility impacts are big all the way in all options. So this is going to be a really large project, and so we know it's going to take some time, even after it gets through all of its reviews, to be able to raise the funds and where those monies are going to come from. Obviously, there's going to be some time for us to work on some of these parking issues that have been identified already. There might be some better solutions by the time we get down to the engineered drawings. But, you know, I think as a solution to go forward, you know, 3A really offers something that can help unite the community around these ideas and really put us on a path to envision what the future is going to look like. So I just want to express my appreciation for that.
Thanks, Dave. Jason Charest found out how to use the raise hand feature, making everybody jealous.
Thanks. I just, thanks, Dave. Appreciate that. I just wanted to share for the group, you know, what the takeaway was from my conversation with Chris Damiani from GMT, because, you know, he was unable to make it tonight. So as a advisory committee member, I wanted to get his feedback so I could share that with the group to help you all, you know, hopefully come to a decision on a recommendation of a preferred alternative. And so they're just primarily interested in the alternatives for the concepts that, you know, remove the striped bike lanes on street, which all the ones tonight that we're considering do. So there's no issue there. They just really need to be able to get to the curb. And, you know, while parking, you know, can create some issues for them getting over to the curb, as has been mentioned earlier tonight, it's not a critical issue for them. So they don't have a firm preference between 2, 3, and 3A. They see them as all being workable for their operations. And, you know, given the time that'll elapse between when we make a decision here and when this comes time to build, there's likely going to be shifts in stop locations and perhaps consolidation of stops over time just to, you know, better meet their service needs. So something to keep in mind, but nonetheless, they're, you know, ready and to work with DPW as this moves forward in the future to identify, you know, places for their stops when this moves into design, which is, you know, some time away. Jason.
Yeah, the one thing I also considered was a real hazard for people on the corridor is delivery vehicles just stopping in the lane, especially on the hill. And if those 2 additional cut-ins could be used as like a delivery vehicle stopping point, where they could get out of the lane of travel and park to deliver their stuff. Because people on the top bend of the hill, I see it every day out my window, park a FedEx truck or UPS truck there, and it's a real hazard. People have bad sight lines. So one thing we haven't considered is a place for those vehicles to park, and rather maybe than residential, if we can do zone parking and people can park on the side streets, or potentially the FedEx vehicles and UPS could park on the side streets, but where do delivery vehicles go so you don't just obstruct traffic for a long period of time?
Thanks, Jason. Jack?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Jason. And I think, yeah, the side streets would potentially be a better solution, because with delivery vehicles, even if they do pull in, they're often wider to the point where they're sticking out into the lane. And then that creates a scenario where people shift kind of over the center line sometimes in order to pass them, which can be potentially a dangerous scenario. But in terms of the bigger picture here, I guess from my perspective, I support concept 2, and the reason behind that is I think if we're serious about shifting our transportation system, which is how I view this project and how I come at these issues, is the fact that transportation is the #1 cause of the climate crisis, which I see as really the greatest imperative of our time. And additionally, you know, automobile accidents and roadway deaths are one of the leading causes of death, especially for folks my age, but one of the leading causes of death, period, in this country. And we've just created a system that's so car dependent. And when we have these conversations about trying to maintain, you know, the level of parking, and that when we talk about maintaining the level of parking, I don't think that's really embracing the transition, because I think that's really about preserving the way that we do things now, which is a very automobile dependent and centric system. And so I think shifting away and actually reducing to some extent the degree to which we use public space and public resources for automobile parking and using more public spaces for safe alternatives, I think that is part of a comprehensive transition that's actually going to drive behavior, you know, differently. And we've seen that experiment play out in city after city that have done this exact shift, where you replace on-street parking with separated bike lanes. We got to do a tour of Montreal where they played this out on so many streets throughout the city. They told us they thought they had removed about 10,000 parking spaces and replaced them with bicycle infrastructure throughout the city and green belts. And they've been able to do that. They've been able to move 10,000 parking spaces and do this because the number of people that have shifted modes is dramatic. In a 3-year span, they had almost triple the amount of people using bicycles throughout the winter in Montreal. So I think we have to look at it comprehensively. And as David said, this is a big project and a big investment. And it's really something that's going to be in place for a long time. And so if we're thinking with that future in mind, I think we should think about a transportation system that does look different than the one that we have today.
Thanks, Jack. Does anybody else have any comments or things I'd like to bring up right now? Am gathering now. So now I don't know if we would want to move on to the intersection concepts here or alternatives, or Jason, if you see this as a time, we could save it for the end to perhaps motion to select a preferred alternative, or would that better come at the end of the presentation?
No, I think we should do that now and you know, move on from the corridor concepts. So I'd like to, you know, entertain a vote. You know, unless anyone has any final thoughts. So I think there's 7 committee members here. It sounds like it's between 3A and 2 from what I've heard tonight. So I guess we can start with 2 and see who's in favor of that. how many are in favor of alternative 2. If you're confused about whether or not you need to vote, go back to the.
Can I review that list, Jason? So that list is Will from the city of Burlington, Ashley from UVM Medical Center, Jim from UVM, Chris, who is not here, Jason Stuffle from the Walk Bike Council, Mario from VTrans, Dave as the NPA rep, and Jack from City Council.
Yep.
And
Maybe
Jason,
just a clarifying point is we're voting on concept 3A as is, not any of the other things we've kind of discussed or reconsider their possibilities.
We should probably iron that out first. You know, would you like to vote on 3A as it stands, or would you like to vote on 3A as a modified with the mixing zone removed and the consistent cross section of the 5-foot bike lane and 5-foot sidewalk retained?
I think that's important because the second plan maintains a consistent walk bike path through there. That's one thing I would consider.
I guess that's question for the group, maybe an easy vote. Is everyone in favor of removing the mixing zone from that alternative and retaining the 5-foot sidewalk and 5-foot bike lane?
I see a few nods. Yeah, give me a thumbs up, or Ashley, I can't see your face, so I don't know how you're voting. Mario? If I could see if you are in favor of changing it from a mixing zone to a separated facility in 3A.
A thumbs up across the board. Well, Ashley, Dave, Jack, Jason.
It looks like Mario is abstaining, perhaps.
Mario, he nodded.
Okay, sorry, I missed your nod. Okay, great. So yeah, so then moving forward, alternative 3A would be with separated facility instead of the mixing zones. And again, that width would come from likely the grass strip to be able to make those measurements work.
Any other modifications to either alternative 2 or alternative 3A before we go ahead with that vote? Thanks, Jason, for calling that out. Appreciate it.
One other request before you move along. Ashley did ask, can you just flash by each scenario again before they vote?
Yep, we can do that real quick here. So concept 2 east. Here's the cross section and the layout just east of the East Avenue intersection. And then as it proceeds down the hill, one thing worth noting, I know I don't know how this makes Jim feel, but the east end of the East End alternatives is kind of the ignored child here, but it is the same for all alternatives. It's worth noting where we would maintain as wide of a grass strip as we can, as well as the separated facilities for both pedestrians and bicyclists. The key is in the western half of the East End here, where in concept 2, we do not have any on-street parking, including no quick turnover 15-minute parking in front of the campus kitchen, as we discussed. And then concept 3A presents the following changes, which would be the incorporation of on-street, more likely to be high turnover parking in front of campus kitchen, as well as the 3 separate bump outs for on-street, we'll say parking / bus pull-off / potential timed loading zone areas along the rest of the corridor as shown here. So those are the 2. And then the important change, as we just discussed, is that 3A would look more like this in the west end here, where we would maintain the separated bike and sidewalk cross section through what we are currently showing as a mixing zone. So that change is part of the vote about to happen, as a point of clarification.
All right, so if everybody is clear on those alternatives, who from the committee votes for alternative 2?
Please unmute.
Looks like we have Jason, and we have Jack, and we have Jim. Okay. And then alternative 3A modified.
Dave, Will, Mario, Ashley.
Yes.
saying alternative 2. I'm sorry, I'm a little behind there.
Oh,
National
okay.
For alternative 2, and Mario,
The 3A, the new 3A.
3A. Okay. That's 7 total I have there.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't love that we're still so split.
Is that 4-3? Is that what I
Yeah, should
counted?
we have a little further discussion about if there is any way to either meet in the middle, if there's anything we could do on either side to shift folks? I don't know, Jason, you're the one who, makes that final decision, but I would just hate to see, a preferred alternative move forward that really only got half of the folks in favor.
Yeah, we're on the same page there. It's not my preference to have that be the vote that comes out of this. But if we can't get anybody to switch sides, then that is what it is. But let's see where things go. Jason, you want to kick us off? I saw you first. Then we'll.
Yeah, I just think that they're basically the same plan. The only difference is those 3 cut-ins, which we haven't defined exactly how they're going to be used. And if you do, get 3A, you could always change, we talked about how much we can change the plans going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And the only difference is how do we have those cut-ins and what do they support? Do they support buses? Do they support delivery vehicles, the business? And if you eliminate them, where do those services go? That's the 2 things in my head. I think there's alternatives for those services on the side streets and things like that, but in the lots, but that's not been proven yet. But like we said, we have a lot of time till that engineering plan comes through. And I don't really see why we're splitting hairs so much on like 3 cut-ins. That's like the only difference really. And they could be added or not. And I like the 1 cut-in, not the 3, or potentially 2 of them maybe. So like, I think that's maybe do some more research and figure out what we really need. But they both provide what I want, the continuous bike and sidewalks through the region. And that's what I'm really pushing for. Thank you.
Jason, if I could jump in just very quickly. To your point, Jason, about how will those cut-ins be used, I think it is maybe important just to clarify that, one of the most consistent things we heard regarding parking was related to trying to support this neighborhood business and campus kitchen. So at least I think on our end, when we were considering how to accommodate parking, that was definitely at the forefront of our mind, was really focusing around the campus kitchen area. Not that it can't be used for other things, but that was, I'd say, the primary goal of trying to accommodate some of their needs that we heard along the way.
I'd say I'd vote for 3A if it wasn't used for residential parking. I don't want it used for that, really. I don't want people parking in front of their house in a couple of spots, but if it's used for delivery vehicles and other things, maybe I'm more supportive, I would say.
Okay, that's helpful. Dave, I think you were next, and then Jim, and then Will.
Yeah. To your argument, Jason, you could argue it the other way too, which is if we went forward with 3A, all of those plans could change if there was actually a parking plan in place. But the one thing when we first got together and we described the purpose of this study, we said it was going to come up with solutions for parking. And if you take away option 3A, we have not come up with any solutions for it. We've punted on parking. And I believe what you're going to have is some backlash right off the bat. Jim mentioned this, is that we had some when the north side was taken away. And by the way, Campus Kitchen says they lost business because of that. They are extremely concerned about losing business if they believe that the city is going to move forward to take away their parking spaces. They will become an active opponent of this project. And if they become an active opponent of this project, you're going to see a lot of other neighbors become an active opponent of this project. So to your point about the work that needs to be done is to solve the future planning. I've seen some great ideas, but actually it's going to take some sitting down and mapping those things out with the neighbors, with UVM, and with Campus Kitchen. And so we have time to do that. But if we alienate, the neighbors and the businesses right off the bat and punt on one of the things that we said was a key purpose of this study, I think it's gonna bode ill for the future.
I think Jim was next and then Will.
Thank you. So David, you put it way more eloquently than I had planned on putting it. And Nicole, you also chimed in with some of the things I was going to say. I know that if, and I'll just tell you right now that I'm teetering on switching from 2 to 3A, and Jack and Jason don't burn me in effigy. But the point is that I sit on the DPW commission, and we have discussions late into the evening about this every single commission. I mean, every time we take away a parking space, it's a lot of discussion. So I tend to agree a lot more with what David just said, that if as much as we want to have streets turned into multi-use and not just for the landlords that have structures on it, I live in a house in a neighborhood that most of it has become apartments now, and there's cars all over the place. That's why I initially went with 2, because I'm thinking, man, we got to get some of these cars out of here. But now that I listen to David and think about what Nicole said and what we're going to deal with the TOOC and with DPW commission, I think that if we eliminate the parking right now, it is going to be a challenge.
And maybe I'll speak to that again. Like I said, you have to make transformation at some point. People are going to feel some change, and it's uncomfortable for them to have change. But we took off all that parking and we put in the bike lanes there, and it's a much safer condition now. And there was some end of the world type statements, but it hasn't ended, and it's fine. People get along the corridor, and it's actually safer. And so for me, I think you can maybe vote for 3A. And when we get forward, that can easily, 3A can turn into 2. I prefer 2, where this parking's off of there and it's on the side streets. And I think we can make that happen. Sometimes I think it's a little lack of willpower or whatever else, it's the way it's been, it's got to stay that way. But, I look at the side streets, I see all that empty parking. I see the mail trucks park on the side street on Nash Place and walk down the road. It's all very possible. It's not like real rocket science. So I feel like that it can happen. We just have to take that stance. We look at Burlington as a city. They're trying to turn back all of the environmental stuff, with all the pollution and with global warming. And where does most of it come from? From all the vehicles here. And so if we just encourage more vehicles, people are going to go there. When the spot was empty right in front, people parked in front. When it wasn't, they parked further away. And when I've come by, I go home and I walk back there because it's harder for me to park or do something than to just walk there. So you'll encourage what actions you want. If you want people to walk and bike there, put good facilities and they'll get a lot of it there. That's it's hard for me to always vote for the car, so I'll stop. And let you go.
Thanks, Jason.
Yep.
I want to give it to Will because he was waiting patiently.
I think so. I just wanted to say the reason why I'm supporting 3A, I think it really comes down to Campus Kitchen. I'm less concerned about the residential bump out parking. I think Campus Kitchen's been pretty vocal all along about the need for that parking to help their business. I think everyone here in the first committee meeting said that they wanted to accommodate the needs of the businesses while making, the streets safer for walkers and bikers. I think 3A makes the streets safer for walker and bikers with the enhanced the separated bike lanes. But I think, if we go with this option and we build the infrastructure to have more bikers coming here, we could always convert those 3 parking spots in front of Campus Kitchen to a parklet or community garden or a stormwater feature. But if you go without that option, with option 2, this business has said that this will put them out of business. And then you have a bit of a food desert in the East End. And I think, we need to do right by this business that's been there for multiple decades. And I guess I don't really see the reasoning why 3A doesn't make this a great street for bikers while accommodating the parking for this business. So that's kind of why I'm voting for 3A.
Ashley, did you want to weigh in? I want to just make sure everyone on the committee has a chance to add some comments.
No, I'm good. I'm taking it all in.
Okay. And Mario, did you add comment?
the only comment that at the first meeting we talked about transit, I guess, and pulling out the side. So I think the option of having the bay over there for transit is kind of why I kind of support this one.
Okay. So maybe that is something that we should consider, and maybe we should re-ask the question. If we were to move forward with a 3A modified, again, we've already modified it, but if there was some provision and if we were clear in the study moving forward that the recommendation would be for bump outs of this type to accommodate parking for area businesses and transit, is that something that as a majority the committee could be supportive of?
Or maybe just more simply not for residents.
Well, see, I think the way I said it was much nicer, Jason.
Well,
Yeah,
I would
it's
say,
more positive.
yeah, I would say for delivery vehicles and transit and, non-residential parking uses, I could support that because I think that gives full, walk bike facilities. The lanes accommodate vehicles and emergency vehicles can get through, and it provides a little less obstruction, and you could also use those pullouts for emergency vehicles going through and things like that. So I think that's reasonable. I'll have to talk to my two neighbors across the street about what they think about their front yards getting diminished, as well, from that. But I think that, from my perspective, that's okay. It's just some grass zones and they have huge front yards. So yeah, I would say I think I could vote for 3A with the option of, and Will made a very good point that we convert those parking spots into a public space at some point in the future as well. Thank you.
Jack, did you want to add a comment?
Yeah, so for my part, so if it was going to be a transit pullout, I certainly would support that. I think that would obviously mean that it would have to be available when the bus would come. There couldn't be a parked car blocking it when the bus would come, which is relatively frequently. So, I would support that, but otherwise I would still support 2. And I think I understand what everyone's saying about the politics of it and the pushback and the opposition. And that's always the case when you make change. There's always pushback and people protecting the status quo. And specifically with this exact change, like we've lived through this in Burlington, every city that's transitioned towards a more multimodal city has lived through this exact experience where there is that discomfort, there is that pushback, and specifically businesses asserting that this transition is going to hurt them, and they're not going to be able to do well without that automobile parking right in front. But when it has played out over and over and over and again, that's not the result that is seen. That doesn't come to fruition because people change behavior with the infrastructure, and so folks visit that business by different modes. In the data that David collected, 0 people went to Campus Kitchen by bicycle during those timeframes. So that if we had the best bicycle infrastructure in the state of Vermont, that number wouldn't be 0 anymore. So we're ignoring all this new business that would come in when you create a thriving corridor that's comfortable and safe for all users in all modes, which simply isn't the case right now. There's so many people who don't feel comfortable getting out on a bike and going on there. And so I just think, yeah, this is an experiment that's just played out so many times in so many communities, and the communities that have actually created this type of infrastructure and shifted their transportation system are the ones that have been willing to be a little bit bold and get a little bit uncomfortable and make some changes that are uncomfortable in order to think more long-term to the future. And I would argue that that's always been, looking back in retrospect, we envy those communities that have done that. And yet when we are faced with that decision, we're getting fearful and we are sliding back. And I think, so that's for me why I stick with supporting option 2.
Understood. Jim?
Thanks. Just real quick, and I don't disagree with you, Jack, but this is something more specific. And thanks for putting this concept 3A up. One of the things I'm still challenged with a mixing zone, that if the bikes come off out of a bike lane, and even if it's a separated bike
No,
lane,
it'll be
Nope,
consistent with the rest of the corridor.
oh, so it'll still go in the street. It won't come up in between the parked cars and that's the concern.
The parked cars will be on the street the way on the bump outs. Look at the way the bump outs are. It's going to look exactly like those.
So what I'm saying is right in front of Campus Kitchen, the whole reason for the mixing zone was to allow for those two 15-minute spaces to remain in the street, yes?
Yes, so they will remain there and the grass strip will go away. So there'll be enough width for there to be cyclists there and pedestrians.
And for me, I'm not concerned about the width. I'm concerned with bikes that may not stay on that bike route, or hopefully they will, but then somebody getting out of a car and walking in front of a bike as it's trying to scream through there. So I guess I'm just looking at this, that cutout, or the opening to the UVM, let's call it the UVM parking lot there. One of the things that I've made it clear that if we close one side, we need to open the other side so that it's two-way traffic. Because especially with public safety vehicles there, and I made a comment about moving the crosswalk to the other side of the rapid flashing beacon, which might give us enough space. But that cutout that's in front of where the closed side would be, I wonder if you just moved those two parking spaces to there that normally are in front, because like Jason had said, if you move it 50 feet away, they'll still walk there. It's not quite as convenient, but they'll still park there. And you could make that 15-minute parking for there, or they could just pull right into the parking lot and do it.
Yeah, but Jim, I think there's still some visualization issue. It's still the same problem. The people are still going to park, get out and walk across the bike lane. I mean, whether they're parking in these spaces that are in front of where your entry road is shown on this graphic, or whether they're right in front of Campus Kitchen. It's still the same idea. The bikes are still accommodated in their own space that's grade separated from the sidewalk. And there are still, either way, the pedestrians, whether they're parking in the bump out area or whether they're parking in front of Campus Kitchen, they're still going to be crossing into Campus Kitchen if we provide them parking wherever it is.
Right. I guess what I was thinking is if they were doing that, they'd come out of Campus Kitchen, and I'm looking for those that they just got their lunch, they got their lunch in their hand, they're thinking about going back and eating it. They'd go out and walk the sidewalk down to their parked cars, and it would give a cyclist a little bit more time to see them rather than somebody just walking out into it.
Gotcha.
That's just that short distance.
Sure.
And because I bike this quite a bit, I'm not as, I won't say crazy, because Jason's a really good guy. I'm not as robust as Jason biking in the winter, but hopefully someday I will. That's just a thought, but the key takeaway that I wanted to make clear is that opening to that to the area there. If we close one side, we definitely need to widen the other one. And I think 30 feet might be good enough. That I'll leave it to the engineers to tell me what should be two-way traffic.
Understood.
So
Dave?
Yeah, just one final comment. Jack mentioned his view of change, and that people will adapt, and people will adapt to change. But sometimes people are resistant to change because they don't have any options. The change is put upon them with no options to respond. My view is that we as a community have an obligation to try to help facilitate this change. The neighbors here, the public officials, and the businesses. And up to this point, we haven't facilitated that change. There may be a view about what it could look like, but as I said earlier, this study, if you go with two, you will walk away from the responsibility of having to figure out the parking issues here. So I think that we really, if we adopt 3A, we really do have the time to work through opening up side streets to zone parking, and figuring out how the UVM lot could work, and these other issues. So I think we had a pretty good idea here that if the residential parking, if it becomes non-residential, I'm okay with that as well for the bump out areas. And we want to make it for public transport. But I just think with the businesses, we have to help them, and because it's fragile. Campus Kitchen isn't a statistic; it's a real place, and its business is right at this peak time. So.
Thank you. Hold on.
Yeah, I know there's
I think we need to.
I just want to do a time check here. It's 7:30. We still have to get through the intersections tonight. We were supposed to stay till 8. You know, unless you're thinking of switching sides, or you think something is gonna, you know, I guess really.
Well, I think at this
hasn't been
point,
voiced already. I would like to entertain another vote, and we'll see how that shakes out, and then can take that vote and move it forward to the commission from there.
And instead of doing it necessarily vote style, if it's okay, I think I would just like to ask each of you, and I'm going to list what I see as the options at this point, because I feel like on 3A, we have kind of two different options at this point. One is just with an allowance for bump outs to be used for transit, and one is using it for parking. And I don't know if that makes it worse splitting it, or if it makes it so that people who were, if there could be consensus around a 3A with transit versus 2 versus a 3A with parking. What are your thoughts on that, Jason?
Yeah, I would entertain that.
Okay, so again, committee, then the alternatives now being considered are alternative 2, which is no parking provided. The 3A modified with transit only being what, you know, bump outs should be considered for, or a 3A modified with parking. And if you feel particular that that parking should exclude residents or something else, you certainly can comment that. Why don't we start with, on my screen, Dave is at the top.
All right, and do we have ranked voting here? Can we pick our first and second? Oh.
Sure, go right ahead.
Just kidding. In terms of consensus, I like 3A, and I like 3A with the parking. However, for consensus, if we can reach consensus with if transit only is the consensus point, then I'm happy to support that.
Great, thank you so much. Jack, how about you?
Yeah, I support 2, but I also support the transit only as well. I think those are both great.
Okay, excellent. Jason?
Can I clarify? Is that's transit only, but that is not business related parking?
My impression, based on Jack's comments earlier, I would think transit only. Jack, am I speaking for you? But based on
well, so the thing I raised earlier is that if it is truly allowing for transit, that means you have to guarantee that it's there when the bus comes, right? So, I mean, the bus doesn't run 24/7 on that route. So I guess,
yeah, I think it's fair to say that would just be a bus zone.
Essentially,
no parking, bus only.
Yeah, unless there was something that would be done during non-bus hours, I guess. But during bus hours, I don't see how you could squeeze in, parking in between each cycle.
Sorry, not to complicate things even more, but there's not a bus stop at each of these cut-ins.
Yeah, there's only one bus stop, and that's in front of that's the furthest to the right.
Right, but that does, like I said, I added that as an alternative because it sounded to me like there was some potential consensus being drawn along that. And if that was the case, much like we are tweaking the mixing zone in response to the discussion, we could remove, at least one bump out area if this is what this group is in support of.
So just a quick clarification, I wouldn't call it a transit spot. The way I envisioned it was a non-residential spot where delivery vehicles could go, buses could go, people could pull off to allow emergency vehicles to go through. And there would be the 2 spots in front of Campus Kitchen ongoing. And in the future, we can reevaluate that. I feel like that's the way to go that gives a solution for everybody at this point. And then of course we can always reevaluate, but that's the way I see it. It's just don't make it residential spots. Allow it for uses of the corridor, not people just parking the car there for 24 hours or whatever it is.
All right, why don't we just start over and tell me what you like, because everyone has a different vision, and let's just see if something rises to the top, because I think instead we've now gotten more splintered. But Dave, do you still feel the same way? You like 3A, you want to provide parking, but if parking with residential, and your second choice would be parking without residential?
Frankly, I'd like a clear consensus to go to the committee. And if the clear consensus can be 3A, parking for Campus Kitchen, bump out for transit, and we can either keep the other parking, for service vehicles or not. I'm okay with that. Most important thing is let's get the transit bump out, let's get the Campus Kitchen parking, and the raised bike lanes. That's what we're looking for.
Okay, Jack, how about you?
I think I'm still where I've been.
Two
Do you need-
first, but there could be a compromise alternative if there's a consensus built, or
maybe
Yes or no?
maybe we need to clarify process. Like
okay, let's just stay with 2 then. That's fine.
Yeah.
Jason, what's your take?
2 is my preference, or if there were a transit only option, but I don't believe that there is that
Okay.
option.
Jason. Stuffle, sorry. You're muted.
You're
Hold
muted,
on.
Jason.
You're muted, Jason.
I would take 3A with no residential parking. That's what my consensus is. I think, is that what you're asking?
Yep. Jim, what are you thinking?
I agree with Jason, 3A with no residential parking, and maybe you could make it loading, unloading only. And I love Will's idea of potential parklets in the future, but it gives us more options.
Okay. Mario?
Yeah, so 3A with the non-residential parking.
Okay, Will?
Yeah, 3A with no residential parking.
Okay, Ashley?
3A with no residential parking.
Sounds like consensus to me.
Yeah, it's very close. I understand, Jack was hoping for that parking to be a little stricter, but maybe that is something that as this moves into final design, we'll be a little closer to being more confident about making those changes. Jason Trust, do you think that's definitely a majority?
Yeah, I was waiting to see if Jack had any further remarks, but if not.
No, I think, I serve on the council, so I'm very comfortable with being overruled, that I just wanted to share where I was coming from and, what I supported, but ultimately this is a group decision. So, I'm okay with not having it come out the way that I wanted.
All right, so now on to the intersection, because we know that's going to be very easy to address.
Very straightforward. Okay, I'm very conscious of the time, so I'm going to remind us of what we saw for the maintained intersection alternatives, but I'm going to breeze through pretty quick so we can get to discussion. And so we'll start here with upgrading the equipment and striping, and realigning the intersection. So just a reminder, that's, realigning East Avenue to come in closer to a 90 right at the intersection, and then realigning the driveway to Trinity campus on UVM's campus to sort of meet that intersection straight on, as opposed to the little jog that you have to do today. And this is incorporating a bike signal. So instead of that cyclist that's making that through movement from sort of the left-hand side of your screen to the right-hand side of your screen, being in between lanes of traffic, that moves them to the outside, keeps them in that protected facility, and then gives them a dedicated signal at the intersection. And moving into the roundabout, just a reminder to what we were proposing here. Again, it's sort of realigning the entrance to Trinity Campus and East Avenue to meet sort of the center of this roundabout option. And so here we're seeing a roundabout laid out, splitter islands on 3 of the legs to give that additional protection for the pedestrian movements, and having those bike facilities and ped facilities sort of on the exterior edge of the roundabout there to facilitate those movements. So bikes and peds would both be crossing, sort of entering and exiting traffic, but 1 lane of traffic at a time with a refuge in between. With the exception of that driveway that's pretty low volume, so that would be striped as opposed to having a splitter island in that sort of curved space in between the lanes of traffic. And in terms of the evaluation, we did add a bit from what you saw in the public meeting. So for the metrics here, we have done a preliminary conceptual cost estimate to get sort of a ballpark figure. And you'll see this number again in some of the other assessments that were done in the interim here to give us a clearer picture between these 2 alternatives. But what we're seeing here is, with that all updated equipment, new mast arm poles, getting those signals sort of up to best practice. And then that realignment of the intersection with the pretty significant earthwork that would go along with that, thinking through, some of the impacts there and what would it take to get that off the ground. We're coming in at, just shy of $1 million on that project. And with the roundabout, and I should preface this with, this is including lots of contingencies and engineering and sort of giving a nice cushion for all of the things that come along with a project here. So this isn't just raw construction costs. We're sort of thinking about this as the whole picture. And with the roundabout, it's $3.5 million. So it gives you a sort of ballpark figure that we can make a comparison between the 2. And again, I think you'll see this in another couple slides when we talk through a couple of the other assessments that we were looking at for these 2 alternatives. And in terms of safety, we did sort of feel like we needed to revisit some of the discussion that occurred at the public meeting. And so we did revisit the safety metrics here. So for bike safety, according to the research, the jury's still out on sort of how much, how much of an impact on bike safety or roundabout treatment might have. So sort of those crash reduction factors just aren't quite fleshed out for a roundabout as of yet. So we don't have a good number to point to or good research to point to that says, oh yeah, a roundabout treatment really makes it safer for cyclists. But we want to acknowledge a few of the sort of design details. So, bikes in alternative 2, bikes are in that protected lane, and then they get their dedicated signal once they get up to the intersection. And in the roundabout option in alternative 4, bikes are only in conflict with vehicles 1 lane at a time. They get that refuge, just like the peds. And they do have fewer conflict points, and we'll get to that in the next slides. For the pedestrians, looking again at the research and sort of taking some time with that, we're saying here that with alternative 2, we're slightly improving the situation. We're giving those signal protected crossings, reducing delay for the peds. But when we looked at the research again and really dug in a little bit further, we're really seeing that there is an improvement to be had with the roundabout option. So reducing the number of conflict points between PEDs and vehicles, slowing speeds of vehicles really gets you some realized reductions in crashes based on the research. So that is something that we really wanted to bring to your attention. And then in terms of vehicle safety, certainly, you know, updating the equipment and getting everything up to best practice in the intersection alternative definitely gets us some safety benefit, which you'll see on the next slides. But with the roundabout, we're seeing a significant improvement here, and that's really based on, you know, those lower vehicle speeds, fewer conflict points. We're getting the full benefit of that infrastructure treatment as it's designed. And so just to highlight some of this, and again, this is sort of taking a pause and realizing that maybe we didn't do our sort of due diligence on the first pass with the public on these alternatives, and really wanted to just pause and make sure that we're highlighting some of the real benefits, particularly from the safety side of things for these two alternatives that we're maintaining here. And so with that new signal, with the realignment with the bike signal, we are seeing crash reduction factors from the research that we can point to. You'll see these rolled up in one of the next slides. So, you know, updating to mast arms, getting rid of those pedestal mounted signals, extension of the right turn lane with that realignment option, all get us, you know, benefit from a safety standpoint. The other thing we wanted to pause and just acknowledge here is the opportunity for more bike ped friendly signal phasing and timing. So by realigning the intersection, getting those two legs of the intersection sort of in line with one another, the opportunity for concurrent phasing gives us the opportunity in the cycle to have a bike dedicated signal that isn't going to cause disruption to sort of the operations in a way that you're going to have a tangle of traffic in that area, and also potentially giving some extra time to PEDs in that intersection as well, especially if we're talking about adding a crosswalk to the west leg of the intersection and rounding out the access at that intersection. So that's certainly something that we've been thinking about and wanted to make sure that we highlighted here. All right, and then in terms of the benefits from the roundabout side of things, we wanted to just pause and make sure from sort of the vehicle, bike, and PED sort of potential benefits for that treatment, that we were just at least acknowledging that research and sort of the data behind the real benefits that could be realized with that treatment. And so here on the left-hand side of the screen, you're seeing the number of conflict points in a typical four-way intersection. And you can see, you know, lots of crossing traffic, which, you know, in terms of severity of crashes and things that occur at an intersection that you don't want to have happen, you know, lots of opportunity for that just by way of the design. And with the roundabout, we're really minimizing the number of conflict points, particularly those crossing conflict points, and really narrowing it down to a couple of merging and diverging conflict points that vehicles pass through as they're navigating the infrastructure. So that really, you know, gets us to, from a signalized intersection to a roundabout, a pretty significant reduction in severe crashes, and later on you'll see, you know, a reduction in overall crashes as well, that we can point to and understand as sort of the benefit of this infrastructure. And from the perspective of the cyclists, here on the left-hand side of the screen, again, you're seeing typical intersection with two potential paths for the bicyclists to navigate through that intersection, sort of either as a vehicle or in a sort of two-stage left turn orientation. And then on the right, you're seeing the cyclist, two options for the cyclist with the roundabout. One sort of operating more like a PED, or more like how we've laid out with the dedicated infrastructure around the exterior edge of the roundabout. So you'd be crossing sort of where the PEDs typically cross in a roundabout. or as a vehicle. And again, we're just reducing the number of conflict points, reducing the exposure for those folks as they're navigating the infrastructure. Unfortunately, the research isn't quite there yet on this piece, so we can't really point to a number. And I think we'll be catching up here. And now that we have, modern roundabouts in a lot of places in the US, I think the research will catch up, but we just don't have that sort of number to point to for cyclists, unfortunately, at this point. But, reducing the exposure is a step in the right direction. And then in terms of pedestrians, what you're seeing here on the left-hand side, again, the typical four-way intersection, and that PED using the crosswalk and seeing the conflicts with traffic, and then again on the right where PEDs are crossing on the roundabout. And those are researched, realized reductions in crashes that we can point to in the research and use to sort of assess how much of a benefit might come of the infrastructure in terms of reducing PED crashes and severity of PED crashes. And then we have to give credit to this slide to Mario. He was the one who was really crunching the numbers behind this. But basically what you're seeing here is a preliminary benefit cost analysis, which, generally this evaluation characterizes the return on investment for a safety benefit from a safety benefit standpoint. So you're really seeing, weighing the cost estimate of each alternative, and that's sort of shown in that annual cost column. So I'll back up a little bit. What you're seeing in the estimated project cost is the number that I pointed to earlier. So that sort of overall what it would take to get one of these treatments in place, that implementation cost. And then what we do is we annualize that cost to get to the column where you see the annual cost, and the benefit is then weighed by the types of crashes that actually occur at the intersection. So pulling that crash data history and associating those crash types with a monetary value, and sort of weighing what reduction we might actually be able to realize with that treatment, and then comparing those two numbers. So we're sort of monetizing both and then trying to make that comparison. And so what you see in the right-hand column there, that B over C ratio, is giving us a relative sort of return on investment from that safety benefit standpoint. So we're seeing, with the high cost of the roundabout treatment, and, certainly a benefit in terms of a 37.8% crash reduction factor from the research that we can point to, it just gets a bit outweighed with that cost. So the return on investment in terms of reducing crashes and having that safety benefit is just a little bit shy of what we could get from a safety benefit in a similar investment with the signalized intersection. So sort of comparing those two numbers, we see that the roundabout it comes in a little bit lower, and the signalized intersection comes in a little bit higher. And so that gives us at least a relative gauge of how these two options from that safety benefit standpoint weigh out. And I guess I'll pause there and welcome. I know Jason was involved in this and Mario was involved in this, and so pause and just give an opportunity to speak to this a little bit more if we want to.
I'm all set unless Mario has something to add.
I'm all set too.
Yeah, it was Mario, was a 20-year time frame you looked at? Was that?
Yes, 20 years.
Okay.
Can I ask Karen, or I'm not sure if Mario is the one who did the cost estimate. The question came up if the estimates include the work within the UVM property, including moving their EV charging station. I'm going to guess it either did or didn't, but it would be consistent in both alternatives. But I don't know if you have an answer for that, whether that moving of the EV station or anything that needed to be done on the UVM property was included in those estimates.
So, and Mario can speak to this as well. And I sort of took a pass at it and Mario took a pass at it. So we sort of arrived at the same numbers from two different perspectives, but my assumptions generally included, you know, either the realignment or the roundabout, connecting that into sort of the existing drive on the Trinity side, the Trinity campus side of the intersection. So in the realignment option, making sure that that driveway connects to something. So it did include that cost, and it included some earthwork and curb work and everything sort of on the approaches to get that intersection sort of from a holistic standpoint in the ground. So that was sort of my assumption set. It was not necessarily coordinating with utilities, and it was not necessarily coordinating with, you know, including drainage and all of those things that would be included in the construction costs, but not necessarily including any right-of-way costs as well in that. And Mario, do you have any other
so it sounds like
assumptions?
You didn't specifically include any cost associated with moving the EV and the utility associated with that. But either way, that would have been the case in both alternatives.
Yes,
right?
yes, consistent across.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, so I don't have anything else to add. Like my costs were kind of general costs just based on regular projects. I didn't really consider.
Got it.
I just wondered, would you be able to share your analysis with us? I'd love to be able to take a look and just see the analysis.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll provide my email and you can send it along. It's surprising the results. I've looked at other cost effectiveness studies and I've never seen any that only looked at the, you know, the crash benefits. There are many other benefits that accrue because of roundabouts. So narrowing it just to the crash benefits seems, I think, is why you got the answer that you got.
Yeah, usually you got the travel delay as well as you could add, and there's some other benefits that you can add also.
Yeah. The state tells me that there's maintenance benefits over signalized intersections. Did you account for that?
No, I didn't. This just include the project cost and the benefits from the reduction in crashes.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the analysis. That's but I'd love to be able to take a look at it. Thank you.
Yes, I'll send it to you.
Jason Stoffel?
Yeah, I like to say that this looks at dollar numbers, and someone who suffers a crash along this corridor has severe reparations in their life with trying to deal with that and all the things associated with it. And I've been hit by vehicles along this corridor and had injuries, and I don't know how you factor that into there, but I would say I'd take the one that is the safest regardless of the cost, because you got to look at your community and people that live there. And we're factoring off like $2 million over a 20-year thing and looking at real injuries to real people who live in our community. And I think you really have to take that into effect. Like I've lived here for 15 years and I've struggled with that intersection for 15 years and a lot of close calls. And so I'd say take the human factor into effect over just the dollar amount.
Jim?
Thanks. Not to always counter with Jason. He's a friend of mine, but I lived in Europe, and I'll just say that I've lived with roundabouts and biked through roundabouts and was a pedestrian and a vehicle, drove a vehicle. And I believe in my mind that a roundabout is something that will reduce crashes for vehicles and actually streamline and allow vehicles to move through probably quicker. The challenge that I have with putting a roundabout there, and I'm a cyclist and I bike for 9 to 10 months out of the year to work, going through that as a bike, I'm going to have to pull over and either cross as a pedestrian, stop. And then if I wanted to take a left going up Colchester Avenue onto East Avenue, I've got 2 crosswalks to go through. And as many cyclists, I'm questioning whether or not they're actually going to do that And if they enter into the roundabout trying to be a vehicle when vehicles are looking for other big vehicles to try and scoot through, I just feel like there's going to be accidents there. And Karen, you kind of mentioned that we don't really have figures and the percentages that we do for cars. You know, we have them for cars. We don't have them for bicyclists. I'm just very hesitant about a roundabout here. You know, roundabouts to me are great to replace the jug handle down on Shelburne Street, you know, where there's significant things. But this is something that I think is going to make it more difficult for bicyclists. Pedestrians, yeah, they can stop and wait and find ways to cross. I'd like to see the shift in the intersection to include a western crosswalk, but I'll just keep saying it. That's my feeling.
No, I will actually just provide this little bit of feedback, Jim. We haven't tweaked these since the public meeting, and that was something we heard loud and clear. So the provision of a crosswalk on that west leg is certainly something that would be carried forward in a preferred alternative. So we did hear that at the public meeting. We just haven't made any changes until we came to this meeting to talk about consensus of the advisory committee. Dave?
I just wanted to quickly respond to something Jim said that sort of triggered. I think it's important to make the distinction that we do know that the number of conflict points that a cyclist is going to encounter in that infrastructure is reduced, just like it's reduced for a vehicle, it's reduced for a pedestrian. It's just that the sort of research and understanding of a crash reduction factor is not quite there yet. So we don't really have that number to hang our hats on to do sort of something like this benefit of cost analysis and sort of quantify what the return on investment from a safety benefit standpoint might be. But we do sort of understand that the exposure is more limited in this infrastructure than it might be in its equivalent signalized intersection. So I just wanted to make that clarification and make sure that came through.
Can I just add one last thing too? So is it, and I'm sorry, David, so is it safe to say, or is it correct to say that a cyclist going through a roundabout is going, if they're going straight, they're going to have to at least stop once to cross one of the bike crosswalks or the crosswalks. If they're taking a left or something like that, they're going to have to go through two and stop. And so what I'm saying is that it might be safer because you're going to make the bicyclist stop. And then they're going to have to, in my estimation, play Frogger and hope that they can get across before a car comes scooting around. Again, that's just my take. And I have lived through them. I've lived in Germany for 4 years. And that's just my take. So
yeah, definitely appreciate that perspective.
Looks like Dave has another point, and would also love to hear from everyone else on the committee as well. Go ahead, Dave.
I want to ask a question, and actually this is to the project team. From your review of this location and roundabout, can you describe the applicability of a roundabout in this location, given the traffic volume, given the size of the roundabout, given this situation? I've heard some people say that this location is too small for a roundabout. They really should be bigger. Are we on the, are we stretching the model to fit in this location? Or is this actually, from a roundabout perspective, regardless of money, is this actually a good application for roundabout?
I'm happy to provide you with my comments. I don't know if the rest of the project team wants to do that. No, we were very careful and would not have put it forward as an alternative if we did not think that it could be a viable alternative. One of the things is it certainly is will operate very well. I know we're kind of moved forward from operations, but we really looked at how it would operate and is it a good candidate as a single lane roundabout? And it definitely is. The volumes are very appropriate for that use. So that is definitely something that we considered, and certainly usually the thing that makes a roundabout kind of fall from favor is the inability to fit it, honestly. Certainly in this location, this is a great location as far as the potential to be able to include it. But yes, I would say from a volumes point of view and just the, you know, the sheer being able to place it there, it certainly makes it an alternative that we put forth.
And one other consideration, being that it's signalized on either end of the corridor, and we're talking about a roundabout in this location, would this lead to backups at the other locations, or how does a roundabout work in conjunction with the other signal intersections?
Yeah, I understand your concern, and that is true when the signals are a little more closely spaced, especially to the east. What the platooning you do have has kind of spread apart by that point. You're not getting as much of a benefit at that signal for the arrival of the platoon anyway. But I understand your point into the west. I mean, there could be a little bit of an impact there. It really will meter people a little bit differently than having them come through as a platoon between here and the signal further to the west. It is a good point. I don't think they're that close. And honestly, I'd have to even look to see if they were in any way timed with each other, because they may not even be at this point. So I don't think it's as much of a negative as it could be in a lot of locations where the signals are more closely spaced.
Thanks.
Ashley.
I just wanted to comment from regional transport perspective. They do not favor alternative number 4 with the roundabout. They prefer the standard intersection in alternative 2.
Okay. Should we maybe take the straw poll just to see how the committee as a whole is feeling?
Before you do that, I would just like to let you know that GMT would also be in preference of alternative 2. It's not super firm. They could definitely navigate a roundabout, but just if they had to pick, their preference would be alternative 2 from just an operation standpoint.
And actually, I apologize. I don't think, Jack, did you add any comment on these 2 alternatives? I don't think we heard from you on these.
Oh, no need to apologize. I was just letting others speak. I know I spoke a lot on the last one, but I'm in preference of alternative 2.
Okay. Should I poll all of the committee members just to see where we're sitting? Oh, Will, did you weigh in too? I apologize. I don't know if you had a chance.
I am also in preference of alternative 2. So the main point that you mentioned about the east crosswalk, in alternative 2, you could add a crosswalk on the eastern portion. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was a modification that we have discussed since the public meeting and have looked at a little bit closer. And again, you know, the benefit of realigning the intersection, we gain a little bit of that cycle time. So, you know, we could gain that back in terms of not sort of creating more delay.
And as far as the pedestrian safety, would that bump that up from slightly improved to improved, or would it still remain that option slightly improved for pedestrians?
We went with that sort of reconfiguring of the safety for the pedestrians, just sort of based on looking at the research again and trying to draw a contrast between the roundabout option and the signalized intersection option. So, you know, those conflict point diagrams and sort of the benefit from a safety standpoint of the 2 treatments, just looking at those side by side and narrowing our focus on these 2 options, feel like drawing the right conclusion was a slightly improved condition for the signalized intersection, and then an improved condition for the roundabout.
So that wouldn't be expected to change.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so
I wanted to just point out a couple of things here that, you know, kind of in line with the idea that this is a high crash location. And so one of the solutions, the roundabout solution, is actually the best solution in terms of vehicle crashes as opposed to the signalized. We saw that going forward. The significantly improved was the category there. And also in line with Jack's thinking about, you know, what's the long-term benefit? Nobody here has talked about the benefit of climate. The roundabout will stop cars or reduce the amount of idling that happens at that intersection. And that's a climate impact. that would go on for quite a long time, for 20, 30, 40 years over the signalized intersection. And you know, I think if you were going to actually include that as some of the benefits to the, you know, to the economic analysis, you'd see that it actually works pretty good. It's actually aesthetically pleasing. I mean, it's actually a real improvement to the neighborhood, I think, if we think in terms of a roundabout here. And so, you know, if one of the things we said in the purpose of this study was to have some of this long-term vision for, you know, the future and turning this transportation corridor into something that's in alignment with the city on climate and sustainable transportation. It seems like a bold position would be to support the roundabout. But I just wanted to add those points because those are things I've also heard from people in the neighborhood. Some of it came up at the public meeting, which also had a high number of people that were in favor of the roundabout. And I've also had several others that contacted me personally about it. So just one off.
Thank you. Jason.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I'm a little torn between the two options. I like the roundabout better from an environmental perspective, from waiting as a pedestrian or a bicyclist perspective. But the current design, I don't like the desire lines or the 180-degree kind of sight lines to the cars that the walk and bike lanes have. And I sent Jason to rest the kind of my view of it, if you can share it. But I think you could make better sight lines where instead of like having it follow the road, you could do the opposite and you could come into the intersections at a 90-degree angle where you can make eye contact and see the person as opposed to these 180-degree dismount things. And so I would be in favor of a roundabout that has those better sight lines for many reasons. But the current one that shows in the plan, I don't like that from a cyclist with the trying to look 180 degrees back, me stop, go around. It's not very safe, and I don't feel I would want that. I'd rather have a full stop intersection versus that. And so that's where I'm torn.
No, that makes sense, Jason, and thank you for that feedback on the sight lines and tweaking the design for the bicyclist. Certainly something we can consider. So I feel like I've gotten input from most folks. Let me think. I think there was someone I wasn't sure. Well, why don't we just kind of go around again? So Dave, by your comments, I feel like you're in favor of the roundabout. Will, I made a note that I feel like you're in favor of the signal.
I'm also a little torn, but I think at this point I would go with the signal.
Okay. Mario, you're in that row for me. What's your preference?
Number two, based on the cost, I guess, mostly.
Okay.
Mario, can I just ask you, you know, if you could share how VTrans maybe comes to the decision to install a roundabout somewhere over a signalized alternative? How do they come to justify the high cost of a roundabout?
Yeah, well, usually I deal with safety, so usually we look at the benefit cost ratio. Like in this case, like if it's above 1, usually it's a favorable option. If it's below 1, it's something that is not really considered. So that's the one criteria in terms of safety.
So there's other locations around the state where you would see even despite the high cost of the roundabout, you'd see the benefit cost come above 1 just on crash reductions alone.
Yeah, some of them are like actually there's one in Arlington where I think that the benefit cost ratio was over 2, but then they kind of look, the traffic design kind of look at the different option, like a dynamic system where you got some signage and loop detectors that can detect the cars, and kind of they decided to go with this option instead, which was way much cheaper, I guess, than the roundabout. Although it was, I think the roundabout personally, I think the roundabout would have been better at that intersection because it's a high-speed intersection. So in this case, I think we're mostly dealing with, in terms of the crashes, we're mostly dealing with the property damage only crashes. I think from 2015 to 2019, there were only like 3 injury crashes there. So obviously, if you have more injury crashes, the benefit would be higher for the roundabout in that case.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Ashley, I know you provided comment based on, emergency response. Is that your support? Are you supporting?
It would be alternative 2, and then just based on that last comment about injuries versus property damage, if that kind of reinforces it a little more.
Okay, excellent. Jim, just to hear your opinion clear, your preference.
I am very clearly sitting in the alternative 2 section of this party.
Very good, very good. And Jack, I believe you voiced a preference as well.
Yeah, I'm in preferred 2. Yeah.
So I have 5 folks that were in support of 2 and 2 in support of the roundabout or slightly modified roundabout.
That was 7 total, right?
Yep, that was 7, and then we have 8 if we have the GMT vote added in.
Okay, so 6-2.
Mm-hmm.
So not exactly consent.
So just kind of clarify, what position did you put me down for? I'd say I'd be for the roundabout.
Yeah, I put you down for the roundabout. You're one of the 2 in support of the
just
roundabout.
clarify, because I voiced both opinions.
Yep. Yeah, but you were pretty clear that you would be in support of the roundabout with a little bit of tweaking to how the how the bikes were treated. And certainly I think, a little tweak we certainly could accommodate if that was going to be the deciding factor.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to be sure, because I didn't maybe officially vote.
Nicole, I saw you come into nothing to share. I wasn't sure if you.
Nothing to add. I just knew we were reaching the end of our meeting and
Yeah.
thought I should show my face.
Are we comfortable moving forward with the 6-2?
Dave, you're muted.
Not for those of us that want the roundabout.
Well, I kind of figured that.
Obviously, the majority rules here, so that's what we're going for.
One thing that may be helpful for me as well as we bring this forward for some decision making at our commission and council. There were a couple people that were maybe on the fence, and I know we heard Jason's suggestion for some adjustments, but if there are any other sort of decision points that could sway you one way or the other, if you could maybe just articulate that so that we can just have that information again, if questions come up at our future meetings, that we can be able to have that context.
Yeah, and I'd only say safety versus wait time. Like, even if it takes me 15 seconds to cross at a roundabout, I sit there for a minute or more sometimes waiting for the signal to cross while cars go through there. So people might say that the roundabout like prioritizes the cars, but I think they're already prioritized over pedestrians and people walking. I have to just sit there and wait.
All right, well, to bring this all home, and as Nicole was alluding to, this is in progress. So we're going to work on some of the refinements to the preferred alternatives that we're going to carry forward, and make sure those come through in a draft report. So developing that in the coming weeks here. But then the plan is to bring the recommendations from this body to DPW, the TUC, and City Council, and have those conversations about the alternatives that we presented and where we landed in terms of the preferred alternatives to carry forward. So it's very exciting. We should pause and acknowledge that it's exciting decision making that we're doing with this body.
Thank you very much for guiding us through it.
Could I ask just for a summarization of what we did, what we are leaning towards right now, just so that I can share it with other UVM people? We're looking for
Yeah.
2 for the
Jen is
concept.
muted, but she's trying to tell us.
I was trying to tell
Sorry.
you, I apologize.
Thank you.
Yes, for the intersection, it was concept 2, the signalized intersection,
With the addition of
with the crosswalk on the
West
west
leg.
leg, yes.
Mhm.
And then for the east end of the corridor, it was concept 3A with the parking designated non-residential, or the bump outs designated non-residential to be used for either transit, service vehicles, or campus kitchen.
And then it was self-explanatory, but on the west end, it was
2.
2.
Yeah, at the public meeting, it ran away with 2, and we didn't feel the need to delve into that one too.
Yeah, I mean, if you all want to vote to make it super official, you can. But
2.
Oh,
Yeah.
There we go. Got it.
Unanimous.
West, yeah.
all right, we'll assume that was 8-0.
Yes.
Consensus.
Yes.
Thank
Okay.
you all for serving on this.
Yes.
It's been great. I know it's been super long. We had a pandemic. And we're coming back from that, and can't thank you enough for your involvement throughout this, and everybody from the public who chimed in throughout the process. It's been great.
No, and for the lively discussion. I mean, we did a lot of fine tuning on the fly tonight, and that's good to have had those discussions and that come to that agreement.
I'm thankful for everyone's perspective and discussion tonight. It's the only way we gotta solve the problem is have a lot of people brainstorm on it. So thank you very much.
Great. Well,
Thanks,
everyone,
all.
have a great night.
Everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.